Hola amigos, bienvenidos también a .NET API Review. Um, man, I keep skipping over the part where I talk about like it's 10. Of course, we never start at 10, so I don't know why I ever even mention it. Whatever. Uh, yeah, we're down to half a screen starting off the day. Let's see how much of this we can get knocked out. First up, .NET Runtime 119671, hide named pipe client stream constructor with the is connected argument. David.
Okay. Yeah, so for this one, I was reviewing a PR and then I realized someone was trying to draw for this scenario. However, I was thinking of a different approach here. And basically is that name pipeline stream has a constructor that accepts a handle and also accepts a bool called is connected. Um, so however, if you try to pass false to signal that the handle isn't connected, it doesn't work. Uh, it doesn't it in fact it doesn't seem like a valid scenario to me, given that having a handle for a client pipe means that you are already connected, and everything we tried, I mean, if someone has a client pipe and calls connect, we're just going to throw it calls connect in a name pipeline strip constructed with this constructor. We're going to throw because we are looking for a path basically. um, so for context, there is a symmetric constructor in server. For that case, having is connected equals false makes sense because that will mean that you are waiting for a connection from a client. Uh, so the proposal that I'm making here is to just hide the constructor um, and just add a new constructor that doesn't take the pool. And also change, I mean, implementation wise, change the existing constructor to ignore the bool flag just for compatibility.
Ignore the bool flag, meaning it assumes it's connected, so it always
Yes,
sets the state to connected.
correct.
There's no scenario where you have a handle that is not yet connected.
No, I don't think so because to connect to get a handle, you call create file, and at that point the handle sorry to actually the connect method in the name pipeline stream is just a call to create file.
But what about p invoke scenarios where you're doing it yourself?
Yeah, exactly. If you call the create file p invoke, you are already connected. No,
No, you haven't called connect to connect to the server, right?
no. You don't. I think you don't have to call connect to connect to the server, do you? You only call create file.
With named pipes, if I have a client pipe handle, I have to call connect to connect to the server,
Mm. Okay, hold on.
right? Or am I? Is that not? I really thought that was true. Maybe I'm wrong.
Uh, you know what? I just checked that, but I might be wrong. I might be the one wrong. So okay, so okay, can we put that aside for a moment? And the other argument that I had is that uh, well, no, actually, you know what? Yeah, I need to check that.
If it's true that there is no possible way to get a safe pipe handle that is not connected,
Mhm.
then um, the Boolean does seem odd. But I would question that seems like a pretty egregious thing to have shown up in the API if it's not actually possible. So I would definitely want to double check it.
For what it's
Okay.
worth, source.net says the this constructor has 0 callers within things it indexes. And API crawling NuGet says there are only 19 packages in all of NuGet that reference this constructor. So it seems pretty
I mean, I think
unlikely that
it's
people are trying to pass false.
I mean, it's only a constructor you call if you're typically if you're doing something, you're already in an advanced scenario if you're trying to construct this from an existing safe pipe handle.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not surprised there aren't that many callers.
Okay. Can we move this to the end of the queue while we check that out?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Next up, this is listed as .NET Runtime 119465, but this is a request, really, I guess it's a request from MSBuild. So this is MSBuild APIs for supporting multi-threaded mode of operation. So keep in mind this is for MSBuild, not for BCL. Whoever wants to, take it away.
Alina, do you want me to give background or do you want to just dive in?
I can introduce the current issue. So MSBuild develops a new mode of operation called a multi-threaded mode, and we are going to build multiple projects simultaneously in the same process. On contrary, currently we do it in separate processes. One process deals with one project at a time. And this introduced us a couple of problems, specifically with our assumptions about the tasks. So our tasks currently, MSBuild tasks currently assume that all the relative paths resolves relative to the directory where the project file is located. And to achieve that, MSBuild worker nodes CDs into this directory, and then tasks pick it up and you can use standard.NET API to access and deal with paths, with relative paths. It will be possible to do in the multi-threaded node without some abstract layer to handle this absolutization of the paths. So that's why and there are some other issues like messing with environment variables that tasks can do, and we don't want tasks from one project affect execution of the task from another project. So so we introduced the new interface, safe task interface, for the task authors to indicate that their tasks are safe to be run in this multi-threaded mode, so they can be run with other tasks executed in the different threads. And it gives at the same time access to the task execution context. We'll provide the access to the safe APIs to deal with the environment variables, to deal with path absolutization, and other .NET API that is not possible to be run without this abstract layer. And I guess I should note here that instead of just picking up a bunch of .NET file system APIs and having it in our execution context, we decided to introduce absolute path and relative path structs that will cast implicitly to strings and allow customers in their tasks only get absolute path through the execution context. And at the same time, there will be a Roslyn analyzer that will prohibit usage of any .NET API that uses relative paths that doesn't use absolute path struct. Yeah. So here it is. If you have any questions, please go on.
I'm still digesting, but just a naming net. iThreadSafe task.execution context. There's a type in .NET called execution context that means something very different. And having a type called task execution context, at least based on typical .NET naming scheme, would suggest that this derives from execution context, but it doesn't. It's totally different. So if we can come up with a different word than execution or context or both, I think that would be helpful to avoid any confusion.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have enough problems with our task versus
exactly.
actual task.
Yeah, I mean, like, unless you already have a different notion of state, could it just be task state?
Maybe, I guess. I don't remember anything about state in our current task API, so we probably can have state.
Yeah, so some of the key insights for this like state structure is like in our initial review of tasks, we've seen a few pain points, right? So anything that deals with current directory, anything that deals with sort of routing or normalizing paths, anything that deals with environment variables, and as you can see from the proposed API, anything that deals with starting processes as well. We intend for this to kind of grow over time, so we're hoping to establish good foundations, right? This is our guess of the kinds of problem areas that task authors will interact with, but over time, we want to make this thing a mediator for all kinds of activities that the engine might want to inspect or log telemetry on or like transparently change the behavior on. So it's important to us that the foundation gets done correctly here. And one of the aspects of that foundation that we are least clear on is like the proposed API here for thread safe task exposes this context or state or whatever as a property that can be, says get set here, unsure on that, but like, should it be property or should it be like a method parameter instead? And what behaviors do each of these expect, or each of these surface areas encourage?
A method parameter to what?
A method parameter, sorry, to the implicit itask.execute method that is present on the base interface already.
It is actually
So,
under the alternative design. You can
Yes.
see, yeah.
So like these are the big questions. How can we set up a good foundation? Is it okay, like directionally okay to try and insert ourselves as a shim to aspects of the BCL that are problematic due to shared implicit state? And like what patterns and practices for end user consumption of this ball of state should we be looking at here?
I think it's fine to have your own, I mean, maybe this is task environment or something, to have your own sort of contextual information about the operation of this thing. I'd be a little worried about, you mentioned this is going to expand. It's already, Jeremy, you can scroll up a little bit. It's already sort of a grab bag of multiple things. And I think my preference would be, unless you expect, well, part of this comes down to who do you expect to consume this? If this is mainly, this thing is just getting passed around and then it's getting passed into various MSBuild APIs that need to do stuff, I would want to keep this as absolutely minimal as possible, rather than making it a grab bag of shimming everything in the BCL that might possibly, access the environment. So like if you're shimming start process just because it needs access to current directory, or I'm making that up, but for whatever reason it's there, then I wouldn't shim start process. I would leave those APIs off of here entirely. I would only include the ones that are sort of the foundational ones, the ones that you actually are trying to shim at the lowest level, rather than folks going directly to the, the corresponding p invoked wrappers in the BCL. And then everything else could sit on top of this. Otherwise, I think over time, this is going to just, you're going to find this becomes every library in the BCL shoved into a single class. That would be my concern. So, this could be task environment and include current directory, getting and setting environment variables if those need to be routed somewhere else. I'm not entirely sure why they are here, but I'm assuming there's a good reason. And then everything else here would just be based on top of those or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think to take a step back, like, so, we're talking about build tasks here. So they do a lot of file system operations and they launch a lot of processes of tools for, your compilers or code source generators or whatever. So generally the way paths are expressed in a project file is relative to the project root. So we need a way to be able to have, multiple things in flight. So if you call file.copy and some other project has started and CD'd into its directory, you don't get bizarre behavior. And start process is interesting because that it by default inherits environment, inherits current working directory. And so that gets its own kind of like, we could, like, you can specify enough on a start process or process start info to override all those and make it correct without any of these helpers. But we're looking for a way to help guide people's migration, especially with like
Sure.
an analyzer.
I think what I would hope would be, and other people can disagree with me, is that this task execution or task environment or task state or whatever you want to call it is just that minimal information that would be the arguments to start process. Then you don't need start process here. Start process that takes a task environment can live somewhere else. If you already have process helpers or process utilities or whatever, those methods could live there. My concern is that you'll find over time you start adding all of the methods here, and then it becomes this grab bag of stuff and people can't find anything. That would be my hesitation.
Yeah, so I think I don't know how much, like we have some helpers. So we have a tool task class that's a helper for wrapping start process. And we can certainly help, like if you inherit from that, we can help people do the right things. The extensibility model has been, you can do whatever you want in your thing that implements iTask.
So
That gets
lots
called
of
from this
tasks are
execute
just
method.
calling process.start directly. Is that?
That's we don't have numbers, but that is certainly possible today, and I've definitely seen it.
So
Yeah, given that starting a process, the two that you care about, current directory and the environment variables, both for the launch. I can see that it would make sense here to have basically a get process start info, and maybe take some of the other constructor parameters so it can be set in one go, or just the default one here. But that you're saying here, I have set the CD and the environment variable because these are the things that are process static that you want to be task local but be started as process static in the new process. And I can sort of see that, but once you start getting down into the convenience overloads of start process, it does feel like you're adding the whole BCL here just to save on a line of code.
especially with the abstracts, like there doesn't seem to be a great reason for those start process methods to be abstract. I would have assumed that those would be just instance methods that used get process start info.
Yeah, I mean so we can move into that phase now of why is any of task execution context abstract?
Because we need two task execution contexts, one for multi-threaded mode, which will virtualize all of the stuff, and one just for the normal mode, so that let's say tasks that use this task execution context can deal with the real environment variables on the normal mode of the execution, multi-process mode of the execution.
Alina, how do you get one of the non-thread safe execution contexts? I just see the one here that is on iThread safe task. I assume that always returns the thread safe one.
Yeah, but the iThread safe task should be able to be run on also usual modes when we use processes for parallelization. And in this case,
in that case, it doesn't return null.
Yes.
When does this return null then?
You mean the iThread safe task?
Execution context returns a nullable task execution context.
Oh, it should not. It should always return yes, it should always return, so we don't need customers to bother about it being null.
Okay, well, with regards to should this be a get set property or just a parameter into execute, how is a task supposed to get one of these in the first place?
Yeah, so this is an interesting behavior of the MSBuild task execution model. So an MSBuild task implements iTask. iTask has a build engine and an execute method. And internally, when you run a task, the MSBuild engine will instantiate an object of your type, set the build engine, the execution context design, set the input parameters from the XML side of the MSBuild world, We'll set those on your object, and then we'll call the execute method. So this is kind of in keeping with the way we have been passing information into the task,
Okay.
which is like you instantiate, like your constructor can't rely on all these things because we want to call your constructor, then set a few of these things, then let your code run.
Fair enough. But the fact that you have two of them internally, that doesn't actually require any of this class to be virtualized. You could have a non-extensible class that uses a virtual implementation. Meaning you basically just make task environment driver as a field, and you build a task execution context with either the multi-threaded driver or the single process driver, and then that goes. And the question, like, you should make it abstract if you want people outside of MSBuild to modify the behavior, or rather, you should make it virtual if you want people outside MSBuild to modify the behavior. And abstract is a interesting question. But if you think there's only two, then this should not be extensible, and you should just say, you get the one we give you.
I think that makes sense. I'm trying the other thing that we have historically been kind of weak on is testability for the task classes. So like we would like it to be easy, ideally, for someone who is writing a task to be able to call that task in unit tests. And this is another thing where they will need some kind of mock for this.
That would, to me, that just means that you would leave this as having a public constructor, and the public constructor gets the multi-thread aware, like, I'm local version, and only you would be able to shove in the process-wide version, because the tests never want a process-wide version.
That makes sense to me.
Because that's, get environment variables. Presumably you suck in environment. Sorry, I missed, but switch back to process start info. So you would, I presume you start with environment, get environment variables, and then save that as a dictionary at some point. And then now, when people are calling set, you're setting it in your local dictionary, and you're avoiding going all the way back to the real environment.
Correct.
There is, of course, the other multi-threading problem of when did you snapshot the current environment, because somebody could call environment.setEnvironment variable at some point, and you need to know if you're going to show that change or not.
Right. And so we are currently today in multi-process mode, snapshotting environment before we switch that node, the process, to work on another project. And so we already kind of have control over some level of that. It's just like within task executions that are there. So we would snapshot at build start time. And then that's the default for all the projects. And then individual projects may set environment variables that will then be usable only to those projects.
On the thing on the screen showing as task execution context, get absolute path, that takes a relative path, I assume? I guess it's actually a relative or absolute path, but
That shouldn't matter. I mean, if it is relative, we will absolutize it with the current directory. If not, it will be just staying, right?
yeah, I'm just
Whether you use Python combine.
looking at the, like, why would you call get absolute path with an absolute path when
Yeah, that is about Roslyn Analyzer actually. We want to make a Roslyn Analyzer that will highlight problematic places in the thread safe tasks. And for example, catch any file system APIs that take string, not absolute path structure. So that's our decision-making points where for the Roslyn analyzer. We'll ban everything that just takes path, but it's relative or absolute because we don't know. And we'll force any file system API to take only absolute paths as a structure type. So it is for diagnosability reason.
Fair enough. It does seem a little weird, and this is the thing people are commenting on chat, that you only have your two choices of getting an absolute path are from this guy or as relative to another absolute path. It does seem weird that this constructor is basically just hidden behind the task environment.
Begs the question how you implement that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I got the question. If you can repeat it.
If someone else is it possible for anyone other than you to implement task execution context to derive from it?
I mean, I think I already convinced them to get rid of all the abstracts entirely and just be a
Should it be? Yeah.
Okay.
not going all the way to saying sealed, but a non-virtual class. And now, Steve, you can argue for sealed if you want.
That's fine. It's a topic for another day.
So there was a comparison to system URI where you can say new URI and tell it, I believe I'm already an absolute URI, and then it'll throw if you're wrong, but it lets you still build one. I guess if this type is supposed to only be useful within the context of MSBuild, because it is an MSBuild type, then maybe anyone who would ever want to have one is going to have one of these task environments floating around, so this is really the constructor of this struct. It just feels weird that I have an absolute path and I want to build the absolute path, so let me call environment get absolute path instead of new absolute path.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. What we're aiming for is like ease of analysis in our analyzer and implementation. So the idea, like the sketch of the idea, is anywhere you're calling a file system API, wrap it with execution context get absolute path and that whatever you were doing, and we'll try to do the right thing for you in that case. And then the absolute path struct just exists as a marker of you did this. There are certain, like certainly you could call, maintain your own absolute paths, figure that stuff out yourself. That is, you could do that correctly, but it is hard to analyze whether you have done it correctly. So we're trying to compromise between having it an easy to understand marker for that and allowing flexibility on the consumption side.
I mean, yeah, so where's my doodler? So I would just think something like public absolute path of string checks path dot is rooted, and then this one, the good old add a boolean that you don't actually care about to just bypass a check from a public API. So someone could say new absolute path of a string, and then this constructor just checks, well, it has to be rooted, otherwise it's not an absolute path, and throws if it's not. But then this one, where you've already done the path.combine to make sure it's fair, you'll call this one and then bypass the extra file system is rooted check. Similarly, this
Makes
one
sense.
could bypass the file system as rooted check because you you know that you did the path.combine.
It makes sense to me. Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to talk about potentially overreaching names of absolute path and relative path, or do we think that Microsoft Build Framework is a niche enough project space that it isn't an overreach? You have thoughts, Steve?
Can I repeat the question one more time?
If this were Azure SDK, we'd say it's too common for somebody to have Azure SDK and be doing something else, and the term absolute path feels like a massive
Right.
overreach for their namespace. But
Yeah.
given that this is only MSBuild and you're probably not MSBuild and doing something else, maybe
We
it's fair.
also, as Rainer already said, we already have this problem in Spade with task.
Fair enough.
It'd be nice not to double down on those problems, but I'm not terribly concerned. I think the chances that you're using this library, you're implementing a very specific kind of thing when you're referencing this library. So you're probably, Rainer or Alina, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably unlikely to be also referencing a huge swath of other, core libraries for different systems. And so the chances of collision are reduced. Now, obviously, if we were to ever introduce an absolute path into the BCL, this would be a problem. We currently have no plans to do that, and I sort of suspect we never would. That would be my main objection.
Yeah, again, I don't have any statistics to throw around, but that feels right? And usually where you're calling this, you'll, even if you're doing something very complicated in your task, you'll usually structure it as some other class that does the actual work, and the task that would be exposed to this part of it is just the adapter from the MSBuild layer to what you need. So that this file is usually not super duper complex, but there are no restrictions. So we could, and like if we want to make it MSBuild absolute path or something.
And what portion of is based on what you just said, very few files that don't do this stuff would be using the namespace Microsoft.build.framework? Or is there just a ton of other stuff in Microsoft.build.framework that people would be including that namespace everywhere else for other reasons?
No, it's like framework is our core types that are you use to implement tasks. So iTask is defined there, for example. And it also has a bunch of the types that you use if you are calling the MSBuild API to load projects or build projects, but you should not be doing that from within a task.
Yeah.
So that's actually interesting. So what about if you're in a library or an application where you're like loading a project, extracting information about it, then you might see more overlap with other BCL functionality because it's, like I am going to learn about this project and then do stuff, whatever the stuff is. But those tend to be fairly scoped as well.
Is an absolute path is just a strongly typed string? Like is it doing anything beyond round trip? What does absolute path do? It looks like it has a constructor that accepts a path. It has a path property that just returns presumably exactly what was passed into the constructor.
You're correct. It is exactly strongly typed string.
Well, it does path combine current working project working directory and path, right? And then that's the string that it keeps.
That's execution context that does it. Absolute path combines on the constructor with string and absolute path. That's the only thing where it is not exactly the strongly typed string. Yeah.
So I had suggested make this constructor public and make it validate the input through path.is path rooted. And then so the thing that it is a strongly typed string that is, unless used reflection, guaranteeing that the path value is absolute or is
It's a
path
validated.
rooted.
It's a validated string.
Yeah, so it's a validated string.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Relative path is a strongly typed string. Absolute path is a validated string. Like the JSON encoded string thing.
I'm not. This might come back to bite us, but I'm not terribly concerned about the names.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. They in general feel overreaching, but I think that the scope is limited enough that it's not gonna be a problem. Hold on, I have to scroll back. Somebody had a comment. It's MSBuildy, so I didn't understand it. Something about tool tasks. Task execution context seems like it's almost only useful for tool task implementations and not for utility, aka pure code tasks. That's the question, or rather comment. I don't know what it means, but discuss.
So I think we'll certainly use it inside our tool task to help folks construct things. But I think it is generally useful if you're going to call file.copy as part of your task work. If you're going to, even just read a file off the disk, you need some way of mapping from the itask item dot include that is passed in to your task, which is usually a relative path to an absolute path. So you'll have to consider that operation. Does that make sense?
Once we get broadcast lag plus typing lag, I'll let you know what the answer is.
Sure.
All right, so absolute path, you can combine a relative path by using this constructor and using relative path.path. Answer was makes sense. But relative paths don't seem like they're inherently combinable. And it also does feel like you have to decapsulate the relative path to interact with absolute path. So are some overloads missing here? Like the relative path type currently seems like it has no function.
Yeah, so the point is that we probably want to modernize our code base a little bit, because if you look at the MSBuild code base and some string path there, you rarely know what path it is, like relative path, absolute path, good luck to guess. And maybe if we can switch to the structs internally in MSBuild code base, that'll be helpful. But for the task authors, relative path probably will not be that useful. So maybe actually we can make it internal struct.
Fair enough. Yeah, if you don't think it makes sense for other tasks to interact with. Because certainly, yeah, I guess the relative to absolute is called to absolute. So there is the combine in that sense, but the combining relatives and realizing that if I want this, I need to go through this method instead of a constructor argument. Like the first thing I would have reached for would be new absolute path of relative dot path, comma, the absolute path that I was anchoring it off of. Like I wouldn't have even looked here. So I mean, yeah, if you don't
Yeah.
need it to be public, then relative path can go private. Yeah. So these are structs, which means you can't stop someone from saying default. Is default. What is the default absolute path going to do, and how bad is it going to be when it does it?
It would be a null path, right? So we'd throw a. We'd then.
You'd just be returning
pass
null out of a
null
property
into
you said
whatever.
wasn't null. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That does seem unfortunate. But I guess I'm not seeing a lot of alternatives other than like marked as nullable. Which I guess maybe that's not so bad. If it's a possibly null string, people may not be accessing. Like the idea here is more use that implicit operator string to just pass it to whatever APIs you were using anyway, and it's mostly as a marker for us. And we don't expect a ton of use of get a struct, get an absolute path and call dot path on it, right, Alina?
I guess so.
So then if it's string question mark and you get a null out, what that means is you pass a null to file.copy or whatever it is, and it does whatever it was going to do before. That feels okay to me.
Yeah. So I'd had the thought, what if it just lied and said it was the file system root, and somebody else said that on chat, and I was like, but Windows, you can't guarantee the C drive, but Windows does have the system drive environment variable, so you could just return, if it's null and you think you're on Windows, system drive / I just lie. The default absolute path is the root.
I'm not completely sure about that. I would rather it fail than do something with the root, file system root, because there was some bad behavior. Like there could be some bad behavior, like deleting some directory. We don't want that to be accidentally done.
Yeah, so one thing that came up in the chat is what's the behavior of string.empty on like DCL API, file system APIs?
I mean, I feel like most of our like path is not going to check null. It's going to check is null or empty. It might even check as null or white space. Depends on how much CPU they felt like burning.
Yeah, so maybe
So you can keep your nullable annotations intact by returning empty.
let's explore that.
Validate path. Null or empty. Yep. And we took like 14 method calls. So yeah, so you can make it be empty. In the BCL, we don't very commonly add conversion operators, and we really don't often add implicit conversion operators. I assume that your toString is going to return path, and that this conversion operator is going to return path, and that you really like the implicit operator instead of having people pass absolute path.path.
Yeah, we want to make it easier to be used instead of the string.
Because implicit operators, really operators all up, nothing tells you they exist. Right? So you know you have an absolute path, and you know you want to call a thing that takes a string, and now you start hunting for how do I do that. And string path looks like a good answer. ToString seems like a good answer. Knowing on faith that you can just pass the absolute path and it will work, that lets your code be smaller, but it's not a thing that occurs to most people.
I guess not. But at the same time, will not be any issues with the Roslyn analyzer detecting such a usage, because if you just absolute path.path, then the type that you're used in the .NET API is still string. So it might complicate our Roslyn analyzer a little bit if we don't do implicit conversion.
Well, it sounds like, though, for people using tooling reasons, we probably need to support the dot path. Like if they called dot path, it does not actually help because the implicit operator would have done it for them, but we should still allow it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I guess so. So we anyway need to complicate our analyzer.
I mean, you would look for. So you can say your analyzer cares that you carried this all the way down into the expression and you didn't save it off to a local anywhere, but yes, that all three approaches of getting the string value, the toString that's not listed here being the third one, presumably all three of those should be valid. Okay, so returning back to your interface, this is the point where I have to say the fact that you want to extend the interface and have to define a new interface is why we believe that defining interfaces is probably the wrong idea in the first place. But you already have one, so adding a new one is probably your best answer instead of trying to introduce the base class task at this point, which would conflict with the class task, which would drive everyone insane. So that's probably fine. And if you're already injecting the build engine as a property on the task using I would say reflection, but you have the interface, then continuing to do the same for this new value. I almost said execution context, but new value is fine. The functional flow, I would say, overloading the execute method would be better, but the way that you've proposed it here seems more consistent with your current design.
We've had that discussion so many times.
And then, so now, so Steve, you recommend they drop the start process overloads.
That would be my preference. I mean, to me, this type is about conveying the core information, and we should try and keep it to that rather than littering it with all the things that build on top of that. So if get process start info is what provides sort of the core configuration, then you can just call process.start process get process start info, or call get process start info and configure it further and then call it. That feels to me better than trying to have a whole bunch of other methods here that layer on top of it. But if we really think these represent the 99% case and user code rather than MSBuild code is going to be needing to do that a lot, then we could expose them.
Yeah, the start process of process start info, that one feels weird because you're either just calling process.start with the process start info, or you're now overriding the current directory and environment variables, which is kind of not at all obvious from that name. So I definitely recommend getting rid of that one. And yeah, then I'll agree with Steve of if these two are going to save 99% of your callers 4 lines of code, then sure.
Yeah, I think we can do a little spelunking to find implementations of tasks that are not tool tasks that call that. I think that's already probably far enough of a scope down that it's not going to be super relevant.
The set environment variable one, I'm curious. I'm sorry if we already talked about this. I've been going back and forth between this and something else. In the multi-threaded case, what does this do? Does it make a snapshot copy of the original environment variables and then any sets are on that local snapshot? Is that how those behave?
Yes.
So today with process mode, you're the only task running. And if we decide to use the node, like your task exits, if it says something in the process environment block, and then we need to use that node for some other project, we will snapshot and restore that other project snapshot. But whenever we juggle projects on a node, and so this is kind of like trying to bring that same concept that there are environment variables for a project, and you can mutate them if you want, but you just have to use this. And you can't just call set environment variable.
Okay.
Yeah, so far all the things on the task, if you count current directory as an environment variable, which it sort of actually is, this is really about replacing the PEB environment with a local concept of environment. So I think that Steve's suggestion of task environment is probably the best name for it. So I've gone ahead and applied that in the notes, but if you disagree, it's your library.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah.
And this guy, and show this just for good measure. I don't write the word public. I recommend cutting that guy. All right. So I think really the big thing was rename execution context to environment. Long debate about overload shape of start process and try to avoid becoming a grab bag, and cleaning up, they're adding the public constructor of absolute path that just does a path is rooted path check. No, it's not is rooted path, it says path rooted. It's an infix. Does anybody recall anything else that we changed or recommended changing here?
Sounds about right. And just broadly,
Oh, I guess we got rid of the abstracts.
right. Just broadly, I assume we're basically telling developers, if you're touching any of these things, use this new thing. Otherwise, do your darndest not to interact with any global state.
Yeah, and environment is already not like super common, but where things really get tricky is the file system API, because there's a lot of just assume that you have relative paths and they will work if you file.open something past it.
Okay.
And then we're writing a separate documentation on like your task should, if you have some static fields, then you need to access them in a thread safe way, and a little more of that. Don't assume that there's exactly one copy of this task running in a process at a time.
And previously that was the case. Like you could access statics with no synchronization and you would be fine because they were only ever run sequentially.
Correct.
Oh yeah, there's going to be fallout here.
Yeah, and we're planning to flag that in the analyzer too,
Okay.
right? We know, hey, you're accessing the static field here. Make sure you're following up.
Did y'all touch on the fact that like even this analyzer is just going to be a best effort kind of thing? Because similar to Roslyn analyzers, we can't like transitively analyze all the code you got.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a given. There's no way to write an analyzer that would be 100%. It's impossible.
So with this audience, then does it seem reasonable that we do that kind of best effort analyzer and have guidance on what you're claiming when you opt into this?
Yeah, we
this type
never
of
claim
task
that our
execution?
analyzers. We never claim that analyzers have 0 false negatives. So did I get the number of double negatives there right? I think I did. We would want we try really, really, really hard for there never to be false positives, but false negatives happen all the time. And so I think it just needs to be, clear that the analyzer is getting you closer, but it's not getting you all the way there necessarily.
I think we can phrase it that way.
We should try hard to not have false positives. People develop because once it starts to be noisy, developers will just turn it off.
That makes sense. And
and they'll be disgruntled in doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the part we have the least experience with on this so far is, we're hanging a lot on, we expect that we will have a Roslyn analyzer that will help with a lot of this stuff, but we haven't seen what happens when we write that and then run it on some of our own tasks and see how things go.
Right.
So we'll definitely try to dog food that early as soon as we can.
And when you're doing that, just the standard guidance of any time you find yourself needing to suppress something, it's a red flag.
Makes sense.
Okay, and I went ahead and doodled in the all the other suggestions for default of absolute path that we've seen so far. Get rooted project path from MSBuild being the most recent one. But all right. So I think from our side, we're as happy as we ever get. Are you guys happy?
Mostly for this part, yeah. There is a very small part about the thread safe attribute that we did not look at the moment, but it is fairly like easy part, so not too much concept about that. So for compatibility reasons, we don't want customers to update to the latest MSBuild package versions unnecessarily. And we provide this thread safe attribute for the tasks that actually don't do anything bad that they should not do in the multi-threaded mode of operation. And you can mark it without changing your mark with this attribute without the changing your task, so that we run it in the multi-threaded mode. So it is indicator, but without access to the execution context or whatever task environment we call it now. Yeah. So the only thing here is that our customers will be defining it in their task assemblies, because that's how they can use the older MSBuild package versions and get some, like more supporting more Visual Studios and more SDKs, and still in the modern MSBuild versions run in the multi-threaded mode.
Okay, so the idea being they can define internal class, whatever name this ends up with,
Yes.
attribute, and then they can put it on their assembly. So you're going to define the attribute by namespace qualified name, but not by assembly qualified name.
Exactly.
Okay. This attribute name is overreaching. I would hate for someone to be typing an attribute, see anything that looks like thread safe, and then be like, "Oh, this is a resharper attribute or some other code quality attribute of like, yes, I promise I've done thread safety checks here," but it means completely a different thing. So this will need a new name.
We can definitely scope that a lot.
Like multi-threaded execution capable attribute. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Naming. We can definitely rename it. Yeah.
MT aware, like.
MT aware. Yeah.
But yes, the attribute as a marker seems fine, but naming it thread safe is thread safe. Yeah. It's like star thread, but different. probably thread safe, but maybe not. No one agrees what thread safe even means attribute. No, that's the same as thread safe, Kevin. Uh,
We could also do something like MSBuild multi-threaded mode aware or something like that.
I mean, MSBuild thread safe task is actually what was a thing someone
Yeah,
suggested.
yeah.
There's an ancient thread.
Yeah, actually, that's really good. I like that.
Okay, I'll just write that down.
I'm curious, what does this attribute get applied to? I missed that if it was shown.
So the problem we're trying to solve here, there are people who maintain tasks that we hope will want to opt into this in the future and get all the awesome multi-threadedness, but also do not want to cut out their users that are on older MSBuild versions, .NET SDK 9, 8, whatever, or VS 17 something. And so we would like a way to opt in at the engine level without depending on new types from.
I see. So they're
New
promising that it doesn't do anything bad, that it's usable, and therefore you can apply this attribute without changing what you inherit.
Right.
In particular, that they can define the attribute with the same name in their assembly and apply it while still targeting MSBuild 11. I picked a
said
number
this
that I
in
think's in the
chat,
past.
but yeah, I said this in chat, but like there's another direction we could take this, which is that like everything we're doing here with tasks applies to compiled code, right? DLLs. But then there's a separate thing you have to do to actually tell MSBuild the engine where and how to load your task from DLLs, and that's called using task in the MSBuild grammar. We have various pivots on that using task element, and it supports conditions. And so there's conceivably a world where the direction we take with this compatibility concern is you add a condition to your using task and add specific pieces of metadata to make this work, right? But that isn't feasible because older versions of the MSBuild engine, like language parser, are not always forward compatible in that way. They don't accept unknown tokens in every case. So we have like by historical like coincidence have prevented ourselves from having other ways of attacking this same problem.
Steve, is there anywhere that you can think of that we've, in the greater .NET space, used a marker attribute that we never made public?
There's probably there's certain that we never made public.
Because I guess the compiler features we tend to say we want to make public because we know they're going to get referenced in like every assembly, and we want to dedupe.
Right, we make them public, but this, are you considering whether this should be internal? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, like discussing the name here because it's the name people are going to have to type in their code seems sound. But I think that if the real intent here is the only people who should use this attribute are people targeting down level with an internal copy of the attribute, then why ever make it public? Like again, discuss the name like it's public, but then just kind of never ship it. And it lights up if people define it themselves. But I feel like
only
the correct answer is people say the new interface.
There's only one case I can think of where and there are probably more, but there's one case I can think of where the runtime respects an attribute that we never made public. It's the opposite of internals visible to. It basically says I'm allowed to reach into you and access any of your internals. And it's never like it. No one uses it, and we never exposed it, but the runtime still recognizes it and removes visibility as a result. That's the only one that comes to mind. There are probably others, but they are remote.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I guess it's a thing to think about. I'll just put here. Were there any other parts that we skipped over? Oh, that you want to offer a base class for it.
That's how we do with the iTask currently. We recognize any iTask as a valid task, anything that implemented iTask as a valid task, but we provide our abstract class task where customers need to define execute function so that they can skip all of this hassle with our fields. And the same makes sense to be done with a thread safe task.
Yeah, I guess we didn't super discuss the name of that interface either.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't.
Instead of thread safe, do we just want to say parallelizable? Or
I like that better.
or I parallel task. If we don't like the isable being in the middle.
Only concern I have about that is it sounds like it could sort of apply to actual task too, and still be a little broad.
What's the name of the feature that you enable for MSBuild for this that Chet was referring to earlier?
We're calling it multi-threaded mode, -MT.
Yeah, I was gonna say I assume it's gonna be -MT because that sounds like a familiar feature name.
Mhm.
So yeah, just I multi-threaded task, and then multi-threaded task.
Yeah, I guess the only and this may be what Rainier was saying is to me that reads like saying this task itself uses multiple threads, not it can participate in something that is multi-threaded.
Multi-thread aware task, maybe.
That would be better, or parallelization aware, or thread safe. I don't know. I mean, the word is already so overloaded.
Then we just send all bugs back to task authors. You said it was thread safe.
Yeah, I guess having a base class named thread safe task does suggest that it is like
thread safe.
Yeah.
that what you're really saying is this task can be poked at by, like, it's not gonna lose coherency if multiple threads are calling set environment variable, which they probably will, because you're probably not going to make task environment multi-threaded safe, because why would you? Or if you use concurrent dictionary, great. All right, do we want to pick a name for the proposal? Parallel aware? There's a class in here. It's in a different namespace.
Yes.
I guess multi-threadable actually matches the feature name.
But yeah, I like that. It's a little clunky, but is very clearly tied to.
Never wrote that one down. I paste. Yep, it is a little weird for an able to be in the middle, but not an interface, but sure. All right, now are we happy?
I'm thrilled. This is very helpful. I appreciate that.
Right, sir.
May your threads ever be parallel. Sure, whatever, I'll leave that one. It's wrong, but we didn't have a good answer for it. All right, thank you guys, and thanks for asking for our opinions.
Thank you very much for your opinions.
You're welcome. All right, David, ¿estás lista? ¿Listo? I'm good at Spanish.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. All right, back to 119671.
Right. So just to address Stephen's comment, yeah, seems like this is only to connect. You only need to call create file. So for that case, I mean, with that in mind, I still believe that having the handle with the disconnected bool properties parameter set to false, it doesn't make sense.
I think it's
So-
fine to infer that getting a handle means it's connected with the new constructor, and then if we ever find a real use case for the bool, which we probably never will, we could always unobsolete it, but we probably never will.
Yeah, well, it could be possible on the Unix side, but actually not quite possible right now. Because
Well, the
I
Unix
mean,
side, we tried to, like, the Windows side came first, so we tried to define the Windows
Yeah.
side with the same semantics.
okay, so you're saying that if it's not possible there, then we should not do anything on Unix?
I mean, we don't want to break anyone.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
someone's, but we don't need to like somehow make it work on Unix.
Okay.
The implementation on Unix seems to basically follow suit, where you only get a safe pipe handle after you've connected, right?
Right. Correct. Yes.
So I think it's fine to just assume it's true, and if we really find a case where someone needs to say no, wait, we can revisit.
Okay. Is it fine to add the editor browsable never, and or is too much?
It seems good to me.
It's fine.
And our answer is every new obsolescence needs a diagnostic code, right?
Right.
Alrighty, got you covered. Alright, so same as the previous constructor, but dropping is connected.
Fine.
Looks good to me.
Very cool. Thanks.
Gracias. All right. Support detect key dependency injected iDistributed cache as backend cache for default hybrid cache. .NET runtime 117976 cache.
Thanks. Yeah, in other words, have the ability to have multiple hybrid caches within an application that are backed by different L2 distributed caches. Right now, you can only have, you can construct your own hybrid cache implementations and register them through keyed DI. But you don't get the benefits that our default hybrid cache implementation has, such as stampede protection. So looking to expand our default hybrid cache to have those multiple backends. We went back and forth on this design with the aspiring ASP.NET folks, which is why we were ready and then not ready and then ready and then not ready a few times. This hits up against a scenario we've not had much of yet, of trying to do a combination of keyed DI services with named options. We didn't have good patterns to follow on that, but with folks in town last week, we were able to pair up and find the pattern that we all felt comfortable with. So the general idea is when adding in addition to adding hybrid cache as an unkeyed service, being able to add a keyed hybrid cache, and through the options or a setup action for that, configure the options to specify distributed cache service key. And then instead of only pulling out the singleton non-keyed distributed cache, that hybrid cache instance could use different distributed caches. The concrete scenario customer has is wanting to have one part of their application use a Redis backend and another part use a SQL Server backend hybrid cache. The ordering of those or some of the questions that came up during design of those overloads. Should we be doing each of these overloads with essentially an optional options name and an optional setup action? Do we do those as overloads? Do we do those as optional args with null defaults, following the existing methods on the non-keyed version? Went with the overload approach, and then the ordering of options name and the setup action when they're there together followed the same pattern we have in other DI registrations, where that setup action, also known as configure options in a lot of APIs, is the last one, since that's often the multi-line argument that you'll be passing in.
Is service key an existing term in this space?
Yes.
Okay. Just
yep. In places where we're registering keyed services, that nullable object service key is the common arg name. So then we do reuse that up into the hybrid cache options.
fair enough. I mean, personally, instead of overload soup, I would collapse the last three things into one, but if it's matching what other things in DI are doing, then
there are other DI APIs that are doing the optional args. So I was erring on the side of being consistent with add hybrid cache, which was right here. But since it is a different method name, since it's add keyed, yeah, it's unsure which one to be more consistent with. And I guess one other aspect on that is the add hybrid cache. If you do it does a throw if null on setup action. If you call that overload. So it felt a little weird to have the non-keyed throw if setup action was passed in as null, and then have an optional one where passing in null for the setup action gives us, yeah, but it's
fair enough.
Yeah. I didn't have a terribly strong opinion, but this was the coin flip I went with.
Fair enough. When in Rome, do as the Romans, but this is DI, so when in Constantinople, do as... Where's that? Turkey? Do as the Turks? Whatever. I was going somewhere with that. Oh yeah, it's you're locally consistent. I don't know. Seems fine to me. Anybody else want to have words? Halter would be the best one to opine, but I believe he's on vacation.
And I got input from Earhart and Damien and Fowler and Sebastian along the way.
Yeah.
And then
I wonder if feels
only
decided
other
by committee.
only other question I'll toss out then is one of the last questions Fowler and I had is, should we go ahead and proactively add local cache service key and the ability to do keyed memory caches underneath as well. We don't have a customer request for it right now. All hybrid caches would share the same underlying local memory cache. If a customer wanted that escape hatch to not share, it'd be straightforward for us to add that now while we're adding the distributed cache service key, but we don't have a request for it, so.
But if you were to add it later, the service key here. Wait, is this column of parameter the same as this property?
It is not. The service key in parameter is for the hybrid cache service key, not the distributed cache service key. So if we were to add keyed local caches later, it would, or now or later, the only addition would be on hybrid cache options, adding one other property of public nullable object local cache service key, and then the APIs for add keyed hybrid cache would stay the same.
Okay, so this is two different things.
Correct. Yeah, there's a keyed hybrid cache.
Yeah.
That references a distributed cache, keyed or non.
And then
right
this
now
is
it also references a non-keyed local memory cache.
Right. But so this is support customizing a key for the distributed cache portion.
Right.
And this part is name the hybrid cache injection via a service key.
Correct. And configure it to know which distributed cache and other options to use. Yep.
Well, only because
Yep.
This is picking it up from here, but this is, I'll say,
that
usefully independent. And this is this is independently useful and this is independently useful, but together they are needed for the scenario in mind.
You are absolutely correct.
Okay. Okay.
Jeremy or Steve, does either of you have an opinion, or Mike for that matter, on whether we go ahead and proactively add the keyed local cache support as well?
I don't have an opinion. I've not done enough for this to know how impactful it is.
I always try to err on the side of don't putting it in till you know you need it.
Yep. Cool. Out it will stay.
Yeah. Kiss, man. Kiss.
Cool. Thanks, folks. Thanks for your patience on this one,
Yeah.
Jeremy.
Yeah, if this was the first version and someone's like, in case they want to configure both of these, let's add them. Yes, but given that this is we're adding a feature and during the addition of this, no one has asked for the other half. Leave it out till they ask for it.
Cool.
It's the long-winded version of my answer.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. We are now down to the future grab bag. I think for enhanced 2 dictionary with duplicate key handling options, we wanted Eric T to be present, and he's not. I don't remember if anyone particular for host application builder ambient metadata. And
That would be mine.
okay. All right. .NET extensions 6509.
Cool. So here in .NET extensions, we have a package called Ambient Metadata, which is just enhancing, adding some runtime information, such as version, deployment ring, etc. And we have this iHost builder extension method to configure it. And internally, that iHost builder method is invoking an iConfiguration builder method and an iService collection method, extension methods that are also public. And this is a community proposal to also add an override for iHost application builder. That basically does the same thing, but just supporting like this new hosting model. And we think it's a valid one, so I'm here kind of representing it.
I'm not familiar with seeing conceptually it seems fine to have something that from an older thing to target a newer thing. I would want someone. Do you represent hosting in general, Eduardo?
Yeah, the hosting area of
Okay.
.NET extensions only.
Okay. I'm not familiar with seeing a generic used as a way to enable fluency here. Do we do that with iHost application builder in general? Do we have APIs today that are already doing that?
Yeah, this is what all the new APIs, including the Aspire ones, use. And the reason for that is that the interface doesn't have the build method. So unless you do it in the generic way, you cannot really chain the calls.
Okay. Just so I can see, what's an example of an existing method in Microsoft extensions that does that?
Let me try to find it. You can find it by tbuilder, looking for tbuilder.
My search foo is failing me. I'm not finding any in .NET extension, so maybe I'm just missing it.
I don't think we have that many in the .NET extensions themselves, only in some templates, but it's the pattern that is used in the Aspire repo a lot, for instance. All these asks that we're getting to support the host application builder are coming from Aspire community mainly.
This does seem to be in a templates and uses a terrible, terrible class name.
Do we? Okay, I mean, I don't want to harp on it. If this is the direction all future such extensions are going to go, but presumably we already have extensions on iHost application builder, and they're just on this iHost application builder rather than on a generic. I'm just worried we're introducing a new pattern here into the core libraries that we don't currently use.
I see. So I've discussed this back in the day with Eric, which is the one who introduced this, and the recommendation was to use this pattern,
Okay.
and
Eric
that's
Arhart.
the yeah. It's a shame it's not here today, right? Yeah.
I just want to make sure it's the direction we're going to start going, because I see APIs for host application builder, but they don't appear to be following this pattern. So this is just a new, where we're going moving forward. That's fine. I just want us to be like, even in Aspire, it doesn't seem like we're doing that. Unless I'm looking at add keyed Azure Key Vault client, add keyed Azure Search client, add keyed Azure Web Hub Sub Service Client. These are all just extensions on iHost Application Builder, not on a generic.
And don't do fluency at all because they all are void.
Right. So again, I'm not against it. I just don't want us to. I want us to make sure we're going into this with eyes wide open, because this
Makes
is
sense.
diverging from what we seem to already be doing. Other than that, seems fine.
So it
Okay,
sounds like
I can.
cir-
Yeah, sure.
it sounds like circling back with Earhart just on that piece of feedback to confirm that was deliberate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like good action.
All right. So the big note, and otherwise looks good as proposed.
Cool. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Since I'm in Spanish today, gracias.
Do you have a calendar, Jeremy, or you do the spur of the moment, which language it is for that day?
Sometimes it's spur of the moment. Today, it was while I was refusing to acknowledge that my alarm was going off and that I should get out of bed. I was deciding what language to do today.
What language to swear in at your alarm clock?
Amusingly, in none of the languages that I speak am I good enough to swear at an alarm clock, other than English.
Isn't that what most people learn first? Like they learn the swear words and then they learn how to say hello, my name is.
Yeah, I guess I'm a nerd. All right. Do we have people for diagnostic should log IP addresses on request failure, and is it a 10-minute issue?
I doubt it.
Okay. I also feel
Our
like
population has dwindled.
yeah. I also feel
Yeah.
like Levi or Barry would go apoplectic.
Agreed.
So
I
I'm a bit doing the same, but trying to
Same.
maintain neutrality as the chair. So all right. Well, in that case, we have hit the end of the agenda, or rather, we've hit the end of what we're going to accomplish, and we're down to a third of a screen. Maybe one day Tanner will be ready to do these intrinsics things that have been marked ready for 2 years, but somehow aren't ready. /snark. All right. Well, gracias a todo. Yeah, no, I've never done the closing in the language that I started in, and I won't try now. Thanks everyone for joining us. Definitely, it was interesting to see MSBuild partner requests come through, and I think they appreciated your feedback and ours. And yeah, we'll see you next week at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel. Wow, brain. Until then, ciao.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks.